A big part of it is that trust aspect that we just can't ignore. We all know this in the B2B and the B2C world. If you don't have that testimonial, if you don't have someone else that a prospect can see themselves in, it may mean the difference between signing the dotted line and saying, you know what, let me actually go look at these other tech vendors and make a more well-rounded decision.
What's the friction that you have to now manage in that part of the process to get people to continue after that initial burst of interest?
It is an orchestration of.
Today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Jenni Ruiz. Jenni is head of marketing and PR for Transfix. She brings a wealth of B2B experience, but it's really translatable to the B2C market in some very, very important ways. We'll be speaking to her about the importance of collaboration and communication with internal teams and how that really keeps prospects moving through the conversion funnel. We'll also talk to her about the importance of maintaining and building trust and confidence and how that's critical, especially when there's a shift in the product or services of the organization. And then we'll be talking to Jenni about the importance of speaking the language of the customer, making sure that speaking that same language is helping them make those high consideration decisions that are so critical on the B2B side, but are also critical on the B2C side as well. We're looking forward to talking to Jenni today. Let's get started. Jenni, thank you very much for buying out some time to be on the podcast today. We're very happy to have you with us.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, we spend most of our time on the podcast really focused on the B2C angle and helping those kinds of large organizations handle how they're talking to their consumers, their end consumers. But we do like from time to time talking with experts like you on the B2B side because there are so many similarities, so many principles that really cross over.
Thank you. Yeah, B2B is a interesting, complex, unique world. So I'm happy to be here and shed as much as I can on it.
Your experience with B2B is kind of unique because you've had to go through a bit of a transition from a product standpoint, right? So the company you work for really started out much more as an operator and kind of became more of a kind of really a SaaS product, right? Essentially that you're offering. Can you talk a little bit about that journey, that transition from being an operator to now creating a SaaS organization?
Sure can. Yeah. Transfix spent 10 years being sort of an operator, providing, sitting in the middle of two sides of the supply chain. So as a broker, we were servicing the carrier market as well as the shipper market and products that served both audiences separately and also simultaneously under one platform so that they can communicate with each other. That worked really well for 10 years. We were, I'm very proud of the fact that we were always noted as the top 3 in the freight world, sort of alongside Uber Freight and JB Hunt, C.H. Robinson interchangeably, for the time. And then in June of 2024, we divested our brokerage. We sold that over to NFI, which is one of the largest brokerages in America. And then we, the product that we were building to operate our own brokerage on the operations side was exactly what we were now bringing to market. And that switch was absolutely, I would say, one of the most pivotal for Transfix entirely for many reasons. One, we were absolutely changing our messaging across the board. We were no longer a brokerage and had to shed ourselves of that messaging, that image, that way that our peers and colleagues understood what we sold and who we sold to. And really streamline as a company, where do we want to go in our messaging? We're at this turning point. We have a really unique opportunity to be crystal clear in our messaging and double down on exactly what it is that we want to say to our sort of our former competitors are now becoming the people that we're selling to, right? So that is absolutely one of the biggest challenges that we had. And in it, there were several conversations that involved C-suite, our founders, and several stakeholders across the board, because we knew that at this point in time, there were no questions that were left on the table. We couldn't. Everything had to be answered, and we had to stick to one solid messaging. And at that time, for a good length of time, the messaging was, we're not a broker anymore. It was clear, it was simple, it was a message to let our peers know that we're not a broker, we're here to service you now. And so that in and of itself is the biggest way, the biggest challenge, but also the absolute must-have is having every stakeholder across the board understand what is the new way in which we are moving forward as a group and we can't leave anyone behind. I will say, when we were a brokerage, messaging was very muddy because we were servicing to two separate sides of the supply chain. And so a lot of the time, carriers were confused because they thought we were servicing only shippers and then vice versa. Less so for the shippers because they were our primary audience, where carriers were more, think truck drivers, owner operators who are moving all of the goods across the country. Were more confused at what we were selling. So this was the opportunity to really be crystal clear, and we couldn't pass it up.
You can see how that transition kind of made sense for the business in order for you guys to kind of follow the market and kind of evolve and innovate and kind of go where the market was taking you, so to speak, and taking advantage of that. I wonder though, as a brand, right, people came to understand and probably came to have confidence in Transfix as more of a brokerage. And now you're making this transition. And great, the brand name is the same, but the product is fundamentally changed. But that confidence and that trust is still so critically important, right? I mean, it's one of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast because we're focused on the post-click experience. And one of the first barriers people have after they kind of get by the razzmatazz of the advertising, right? One of the first barriers they have is saying, can I trust this? Is there confidence I can place in this organization, in their product, and who they are? So did you find it a challenge to maintain that confidence and trust? Was that easy? Was that hard? How did you kind of go about kind of tackling that issue?
It was an incredibly unique challenge because imagine flipping the tables and saying to your former competitors, hey, we have a product for you now. Trust us, right? Luckily, however, we saw it more as a big positive for us because we'd been in the industry for 10 plus years. We were already servicing many folks across the chain and having conversations with decision makers in the buying committee on both sides where they understood, okay, we're not selling secrets. We're giving everyone an opportunity to be let in on our experience as a broker, right? We use that to say, okay, here are all the things that we went through in the last 10 years. Here are the mistakes that we made. We're being honest and transparent about it because that was also part of the new way forward, right? Was sort of pulling up the hood, giving everyone a clear view of all the places that we had been to, of all the challenges that we had to tackle, all the reiterations of the products that we need to adhere to, because maybe one thing wasn't working for us as when we were operating in a brokerage in that way at that time. And so we decided it was time to be really transparent about that. So a lot of the transparency were in prospect meetings and discovery meetings. Oh, we know that. We've been through that. Here's how we solved for that. But then you also deal with sort of this other underlying challenge of where the industry is headed, right? So there's this point in time right now in the supply chain where AI is just now starting to infiltrate the market. I feel we're not necessarily left behind, but the trucking industry is a little more nuanced in its acceptance to, technology. It's always been that way. I think we're catching up a lot more now in these worlds because, frankly, we have to with the economy and how quickly it moves. But one thing that we did ask ourselves was, do we want to continue to be the Transfix? Do we want to change our name? Do we want to completely change our identity with the same people? But we felt that it was really important to stick to exactly what people already recognize and just really focus on the messaging. And again, it goes back to that everyone is in lockstep, our CEO. It's important that when they are talking to prospects or when they're talking to anyone that we used to work with before, they're telling the full story. And then everyone follows suit. What I love, too, is that we're all very honest and open about, what worked and what didn't as a brokerage. And I think that is what has really put that trust and as something that we earned and we were proudly sort of in all of the experiences where you click. Our website, our social, interviews, our in-person events, things like that, all are very much centered around the same message. And I think that's the only way that we would have been able to keep the trust.
So I wonder, as you've worked so hard to keep and maintain that trust and obviously to build upon that trust, how have you layered on top of that need to be different as well, right? To not kind of sound the same as everyone else, the same story, the same message, the same taglines that everyone else was kind of using to promote your product. How did you make sure that you said, well, yes, we're doing these services that we're now offering to you. Yes, we used to be customers of these services. We're now offering them to you. But here's what's different about us in terms of how we're positioning ourselves and giving you value.
So the interesting thing about the world of supply chain and logistics and technology is you have a lot of folks entering the field, providing these new services, providing these new tools, and they are not necessarily from freight. They can't speak the same language that brokers speak, right? There's such a learning curve. Myself as a marketer had to understand and really own as my own language, right? And so because of that, when you see sort of these new players in the field joining and causing a lot of disruption and causing a lot of noise, one of the biggest, this goes for any B2B company or experience, but especially in freight, if there's no trust there, if there's no validity, if you cannot speak the same language as your customers, you might as well just call it a day. You really should, because at the end of the day, you're going to be questioned, you're going to be put on the line, because we're talking about technology that helps brokers scale largely, that helps them get new contracts, that helps them maintain those contracts, that helps them identify risk to their business. And so if we can't speak that same language, that's our biggest differentiator. And then when it comes down to people as individuals, I'm sure I'm not giving you anything groundbreaking here. But authenticity really does matter. And I'm not saying go lean into yourself and curse out there and say everything that you want to say, but it's okay to be silly. It's okay to geek out about freight. It's okay to, if you have a message, if you have a core theme and you really want to go out with that, go forth. We are not a prescriptive brand. We're just here to be part of the conversation and sit at the table. And most of the time, we really just would rather other brokers go out and share their stories. And we're just there like, yeah, that's exactly what happened to us, and sit there with validity. So I think those, authenticity and also being able to speak the same language as your prospects and your customers is absolutely essential. And also just not being prescriptive. I think we're at a point in time where you look at LinkedIn, you can scroll through your feed, and you see a lot of folks that are competing for visibility, and there obviously a lot of it is written by AI, enter long, LLM here, right? And you'll see a lot of that out there, but really it's about owning what it is that you want to say, and sticking to that and doubling down, and also not being afraid to be challenged. That is the biggest thing as well. We welcome the challenge and we take it on, with pride, but also transparently tell you, okay, maybe that's not exactly what we thought, but here are some learnings. So I think all of those things sort of create this secret sauce to, stay ahead, stay relevant, stay part of the conversation when it comes to owning that messaging.
It's refreshing to hear, right? Because what you're really, telling our listeners, which I fully appreciate, is this need to look at this very holistically, right? And not to kind of isolate this into kind of a couple of kind of just, levers you pull and this is all going to magically happen, right? But that you had to find the right mix of messaging, of positioning, of transparency, of empathy, right? And it was that combination of things, that recipe, that special sauce, as you kind of referred to it as, that really put you in a position to stand out as different from the competition in the marketplace, and kind of put you in a place that others necessarily couldn't follow or couldn't easily follow because of the recipe that you'd created for yourselves. So I can see how that would have a powerful impact in terms of creating that trust and creating that confidence and helping to move people through that decision-making process. As you know, it is a process, making the decision. So, you have to establish some semblance of trust. You have to orient people, make sure that you're giving them the right information. But then there has to be that element of stimulation, all right, of motivation in the process to kind of say, okay, what reason do I have to move forward? I know in the world of B2C, and similarly in the world of B2B, one of the main kind of levers or tools that's used to do that is social proof, right? You're saying, hey, this is what other people are doing, therefore you should be doing this too. People don't like uncertainty, so hearing what other people are doing makes them feel more confident. But I know that's a challenge for you because you have customers who perhaps don't want to share their successes with the world, with what they're doing with Transfix. Can you speak a little bit about why that's such a challenge?
It's the biggest challenge to try and get a broker to sing your praises. And it's a very competitive landscape. And we completely understand that because, again, we've been there. We know that as a broker, you may want to keep your technology close to the vest because you don't want that other broker to outbid you on a contract that they've been working on for months of strategy and getting everyone in a room. So it is a lot more challenging, but a big part of it is that trust aspect that we just can't ignore, right? Like we are building alongside our customers at any point in time, whether they are simply looking at our cost models or they're looking at our TMS. It does not matter. Your feedback as our customer is incredibly relevant to help us prioritize, deprioritize certain things on our roadmap. So we have no choice but to build with our customers and to listen to what it is that is going to help them. And I think because of that, I won't say every single broker will keep a secret on their technology vendors, but there are some really cool ones out there who have allowed us to, showcase them singing our praises and showcase their testimonials. It's gold. You really can't move forward sometimes, most times, right? We all know this in the B2B and the B2C world. If you don't have that testimonial, if you don't have someone else that a prospect can see themselves in, it may mean the difference between signing the dotted line and, saying, you know what, let me actually go look at these other tech vendors and make a more well-rounded decision. So it's a challenge trying to get those folks to agree to those testimonies. But I will say the ones that have agreed have really changed the game in terms of bringing other folks, giving them that sigh of relief that, okay, if this worked for GenPro, then this will work for us.
I love the fact that you really center that around this idea of a relationship that you're building, right? And that once you build that relationship again, which obviously should engender some semblance of trust as you build any good relationship, right, between two people or two organizations, that semblance of trust allows them to feel like, okay, yeah, you can talk about us, like that's fine, it's okay, right? So you built this really positive momentum along the course of this relationship that kind of allows you to use that and hopefully therefore to create more relationships, right, based on the social proof that they're allowing you to share. So I wonder, let's continue to kind of go down that path. So we're kind of going down the conversion funnel, right? So we're talking about, okay, we have a product, we're building trust, we're building confidence in this product. Okay, well, what's going to stimulate me to keep moving forward? Okay, I see these other companies are using them. They're being successful. They're moving forward with the product. Awesome, great. All right, now I'm going to go on the website. I'm going to fill out the form. I'm going to become a lead, right? Now, the challenge now shifts back to you guys. I was like, okay, now we've got a lead, we've got a conversation. Now your challenge is, right, you got to bring those to discovery and to demo, right? Now, what's the challenge? What's the friction that you have to now manage in that part of that process to get people to continue after that initial kind of burst of interest?
It is an orchestration of great communication across multiple stakeholders in the organization. That's essential. We have our sales team that are completely aligned with our marketing team, that are completely aligned with our product team, that are completely aligned with our engineers. There is no way that any of those things can not exist and it mean moving someone through the pipeline effectively. So when we look at someone who has become a lead, they've filled out their form, now we want to move them into discovery, we do all the research that we can up front before we sit with that prospect. So that way we can ask them questions. We can be a part of the conversation as opposed to us jotting down notes and sort of letting the prospect do all the work. It has to be a partnership from the beginning. That is absolutely essential. It is important for us to then relay, here are all the priorities that this person wants. Are we able to properly come to the table with solutions to all of these things? Maybe the answer is yes. Most times I will happily say that it is. But there are situations where we are asked upfront for a feature or something that we have on our roadmap for way down the road, potentially Q4, maybe even Q1 into next year. And at that point, we need to determine, is this something that we can prioritize much earlier in the process of our roadmap? Can we move it up? Or is this something that we have to transparently relay back to the prospect? Hey, we understand that you're looking for this today. We cannot service that today. What we can do is build a pipeline to get you to that in Q4, Q1 of next year. So I say all that to say, we are really, truly in lockstep with all of our prospects, even when, because it does happen, they say, no, thank you. And that doesn't mean that it stops there. It doesn't mean that they get thrown away. It means that the relationship continues to build in a different way. We are paying attention to who you do sign with. We are paying attention to what you're saying on LinkedIn and pain points when people get upset. That's mostly the biggest time that you hear from them. That's the biggest time that they are more willing to express their needs and their wants and their challenges and their roadblocks. So I say all of that has to be a well orchestrated machine. It has to play well like music. And then we play those songs over and over so that we understand, okay, maybe it's a no today. But if more of these prospects keep identifying the same trends, we have no choice but to move that feature set up in the roadmap because it is becoming a trend for brokers. It is becoming a problem for our market. And we have to address that sooner rather than later because then we just become out of touch.
Couple of things that really stood out to me because they're themes that have come up again and again on the podcast. One is the importance of internal alignment, right? So alignment between marketing, sales, engineering, operations, right? All these teams really have to be in lockstep. They have to be in alignment in order to deliver that experience. Again, that post-click experience where people are trying to make that decision because it gets, as you know, that's where it gets complicated, right? Like getting to the website, relatively speaking, whatever, but that's relatively easy, right? I can click around, I can explore whatever. But once I kind of get there and it's like, okay, now I want you to take an action and then another action and then another action, right? That's where it becomes like more of a load on that decision maker, on that team of people that's trying to make that decision. And now it really becomes this orchestration, right? Where you're just trying to guide these people through this process. And it's so important for those internal teams to really be aligned around that same goal, working together and not have those communication gaps, but be collaborating in order to drive that kind of experience for the prospect who you hope obviously to end up being a customer. So that's one thing I really wanted to call out. The other thing I loved, which you touched on even earlier in our conversation, and I'd like to dig into a little bit more, is the importance of feedback and research, is getting people, hearing what people have to say, hearing what the customers are telling you, hearing what prospects are telling you, and then creating that feedback loop that says, okay, how do we feed that back into our product? How do we feed that back into our process? And how do we use that to continue to kind of iterate and grow and move in the right direction so that you're keeping pace with the market, which is always shifting, and your potential customers that are always shifting with competitors that are making changes? How have you seen that? And this is kind of a broad question, but how have you seen that kind of thinking of creating this feedback loop, right, of research and feedback? How have you seen that really have a powerful impact on the organization?
So I'll give you a great example. I was not as involved in our sales cycle prior to June 2024. That was something that was, we were a much bigger team. We obviously had a big brokerage that we were operating. So there were multiple other stakeholders involved. What I did know, however, was that it was a very disjointed process. And I'll be completely transparent about that. Information that one stakeholder had did not seamlessly cross the board to another. And we knew that that was the case when we were a brokerage. It wasn't going to happen post that. It just couldn't. And so at this point in time, we have weekly meetings, sometimes twice, 3 times a week, where we're meeting consistently to say, here are all our priorities for the week. Here's what we're hearing from our prospects and also from our customers. Are there trends that we can identify? If there are, fantastic. If they're not, they're still tracked, and there's still things that we keep at the top of mind so that when we continue to have these discovery calls and these demos and so forth, we're identifying those. One thing that I do want to say, though, is that when you get that feedback, it may be from your buying committee on the C-suite side, and that may not be potentially aligned with end users, which we found multiple times. And so that is something else that we find to be our responsibility where, hey, we might be talking to this end user today, just so you understand, these are things that we're hearing from your team. Because if we're not providing that communication across the board, it can't just be internal. It has to be with our partners as well. We may not have that buy-in because change management is a huge part of being able to have a successful sales cycle. And then from there, a successful partnership for, you're hoping, years to come, right? So I have seen both sides. I will say, you cannot, as an organization, move forward without having those main touch points. I think having the face-to-face is always the best because you can, in live, you can have those conversations live and triage them in real time. If you can't, that's also fine, but document. So that way when someone else is looking at a prospect's portfolio, they understand, okay, these are challenges we can identify and so forth. But without that, I mean, everything's going to fall apart. Doesn't matter how beautiful it looks outside, guarantee you on the inside, it's a mess.
As you kind of talk about that, and as you continue to move through that process of making sure that you're keeping an ear out to what's happening, right? And you're being responsive to what people are saying. I think one of the challenges that B2C has that B2B is probably just better at overall is a lot of times B2C will start that listening process, but then they'll get to a point, usually purchase, and that's when they'll stop listening. Like, all right, we listened to you enough, we got you, like we're good. Like, we're done with this, right? Whereas I think B2B, because retention, managing churn is so critically important to the business, and it's critical on the B2C side too, it's just oftentimes they don't see it. Because it's so critically important to the business, you have to kind of maintain that same experience. You have to keep that ear open, continue building that relationship, continue getting feedback, even after they actually sign the contract, and keep them going because you want to retain them. You want to grow the lifetime value of that potential customer, right? You want them to stay happy along the way. And as we kind of talked about earlier, you want them to feel comfortable evangelizing. You want them to feel comfortable sharing their story and saying, hey, this is what's great. So in talking about retention, one of the things I know you know very well is, you bring someone kind of to a high when it comes to building them up to the sale. So you're building momentum, you're getting them excited. These are all the wonderful things you'll be able to do with the product. This is awesome. This is great. And they get to this high point and it's like, all right, I'm ready to sign. Awesome. And then they sign the contract. And then there's a dip. And it's not necessarily a dip in the experience. It's just a bit of like, oh my goodness, what have I just done? Like, did I do the right thing? Right. Right. Because now like I've committed myself to this thing. Like, is this going to go well? So I know you and your organization are really focused on saying, all right, let's continue that baton. Let's pass it on. How do we onboard? How do we help the customer kind of stay high and how they're feeling about this experience? How much focus do you spend on that just initial kind of handoff from sales to saying, all right, customer success or whatever you happen to call that team, all right, we've got this customer, we're going to keep them safe and we're going to get them going and get them to getting value out of the product?
So we're a little bit of in a unique situation because we don't have account managers, right, who would necessarily be the, I guess, in charge of those relationships post-sale. Our sales team is deeply involved in the account management process. We have an incredible head of implementation. His name is David Frazier. If he's listening, he's so wonderful. And we owe quite a lot to him for maintaining these relationships because he is incredibly thorough in passing along every pain point, every bit of stickiness, every bit of disruption that happened during the onboarding process. And then from there, our customer support team, who are equally incredible, will continue the conversation. So I'll give you a little bit of a look under the hood. All of our communication is in Slack. So we have every customer has its own dedicated channel where everyone in a representative of every organization is in there. So you have sales, product, engineering, operations, marketing, and we have most of our C-suite in each individual one as well. So they all have a very clear line of sight of usage. Number one, if we see any dips, that usually signals some sort of an issue, in which case, we will bring those up in our weekly or bi-weekly check-ins. And the communication is always documented and we all triage honestly together as a team. I will say this is quite unique, but for our size, we're about 50-ish strong. We're all able to step in and provide insight when necessary. Because honestly, sometimes sales is having these conversations off the books, right? Like they might be texting or calling with their stakeholders and then feeding that information to us where we may not have line of sight in sort of, cross-organizational check-ins. So that's incredibly important. It's all documented. We triage together. And I think another thing too is just understanding when we change management, again, I keep bringing it up, but it's such an important tool in understanding how folks are utilizing your product. Are they using things the right way, right? We take a look into wrong clicks. We take a look into those usage reports every single day. And I am not exaggerating. Every single day we see a report of everyone's usage. and we flag them. The other thing that I'll say that's equally as important is that we are meeting with our customers in however way they want, right? There are some that want to meet regularly. We meet with them every single week. There are some that they're a little more hands-off. Maybe we meet monthly. Either way, we still keep those lines of communication open across the board because there are points in time where maybe stakeholders on the C-suite side may not be speaking to their end users every day because it's a large organization that exists across multiple states in the country. So all of that is something that we need to be aligned with. It's exactly how we keep the relationship going. And it's also how we preemptively identify, is that customer going to stay on with us another year? Is that customer, maybe thinking about backing out of a contract? I'm not saying it happens frequently, but it's something that you need to be aligned with and understand, because if you can see that slight glimmer in the distance, you can at least triage for it today. And maybe it's just a matter of, maybe in onboarding, they needed more of a walkthrough. Maybe they needed more documentation or hands-on training. So those are all ways in which we keep that relationship post the signing.
I love how during the course of this conversation, you've really taken us through, who are we as a brand? What's our product? How are we introducing that message in that? How are we helping people make the right decision? How are we kind of holding their hand to the sales process and starting to build that relationship? And now, even after they've sold us, how do we continue to invest in that relationship? How do we continue to make them feel comfortable, like they're cared about, right? That you're trying to help them get the most in their dollar being invested with Transfix and all the things they can do with the tool, right? So it's really that complete cycle, that complete life cycle of the customer you've really taken us through. And again, even though it's a B2B customer, it's very easy to see how all those same principles really do layer themselves with a B2C customer, right? You're doing the same thing with a person. You're still trying to help them be comfortable, build trust, make a decision, maintain that relationship, retain them as a customer, and build lifetime value in the long term. So that's all great. One more thing I want to touch on, Jenni, and you touched on this early in the conversation, and I want to make sure to hit it because this is an issue that's faced in a number of different industries, and this is the challenge of incorporating AI. Now, a lot of times on the podcast, we talk about just how people are using AI and so forth, but with you in particular, one unique challenge you have is that you have to make AI comfortable to the audience of people that you're marketing to, and you're marketing to an audience of people that may not be as comfortable with AI as perhaps maybe another group that might be more tech savvy, that might be maybe a little bit younger generationally, right? So now you're having to kind of introduce this idea in a way that allows you to keep up with the market, but in a way that doesn't become a turn off to your potential customer base because of maybe how they might view AI differently than perhaps a younger or more tech savvy generation. How are you kind of trying to navigate those challenges?
It is no easy feat to navigate the challenge of the discussion, will AI replace my job? At all. It's a very much a pain point. I mean, I, as a marketer, have even grappled with the concept of maybe I'll be replaced as well somewhere down the line. So I think table stakes is understanding that that is something that is somewhere maybe forefront and maybe in the back of the mind, but it still exists somewhere in the conversation, and we should address it head on. When we look at our brokerages that we service, a lot of the times, I remember, this is a quick story that's an aside, but matters to the kind of audience that we have. When we started as a brokerage, I remember hearing on the ops floor, our carrier managers asking truck drivers to download our app so that we can track where they are and update their shippers on what the status of, when they would reach a facility, by how long and at what time. That was painful for our truck drivers. They didn't want to do it. They felt like they were being big brothered, and they simply wanted no part of it. Fast forward to today, that conversation has shifted a bit, right? We're not asking folks to download our app, but we are talking about how AI is a part of our platform. And so the moment you hear that, you get two completely different reactions. You get from the buying committee, again, usually C-suite, VPs, et cetera, that love it and need to have that as a part of their, sort of, for lack of a better term, box checking when it comes to implementing more vendors with their VC money. Now, then you have the other side of that where you're looking at end users who are terrified, because does that mean that having all this shiny AI and automation mean that I don't have a role here anymore? And that is not the case. We are not in the business of replacing people. We are in the business of helping you scale, because in this economy, and in the freight economy especially, we've been in a recession for 5+ years. It's a really long time to be in a recession. And so when you have these tools that are at your disposal to use and scale a market that has been really tough for balance, right? Carriers are getting paid less money. Shippers are paying less money because they have more goods that they need to move across. And it's also, we're up against an economy that is, quite frankly, really hard and challenging for the consumer, and then really hard and challenging for the P&L of a big box shipper. So we're up against all of these things. The biggest thing, though, is that we come to the room and we say, we know what you're thinking. We know where your end users are already feeling. So a part of that is we actually do make it a point to go on site to our customers to, one, show them the product, address any questions and concerns ahead of the signing. Then we come back and we'll do implementation in person. So that way we can address those issues head on. And, there have been times where we've gone in person and have felt a bit of the cold shoulder because, maybe the folks feel like we are going to replace them in the end. But again, it's not about that. It's really about being able to lean into the messaging that is true. We're here to help you scale so that way you could get paid more money. You can work less hours and be at home with your family. You can get the time back to not have to worry about all these little administrative things that you really are annoyed by, but take up a good portion of your day. And here you go. This is now time to strategize. This is now time to actually lean into the core role of what you were supposed to do in the first place. So it's not an easy task. It's very challenging, but it's something that we so firmly believe in. But it has to come from us. It has to be something that we verbalize, and it can't just be in written marketing. We have to embody that. And I think that's something, I'll say one last thing that's a testament to, not replacing folks in the business. A lot of our people are boomerangs. They've left us for a point in time, and then they've come back. Our sales team is 100% boomerang, right? So if that's not a testament to the fact that we're not here to replace you, we're simply here to empower you, which sounds hokey and, it sounds very zen, but it really, truly is what we're here to do. So if we stick by that in our morals and in the way that we present ourselves, both in our marketing, but in our strategy and in our relationships, then that is something that we can manage as a challenge that will continue, honestly, down the road.
If I was going to summarize this episode in one word, that word would be relationship. Your organization is very much relationship oriented, and you're trying to build that relationship from the first initial message and touch point and maintain that relationship all the way through and help people to feel comfortable and allow that relationship to improve upon itself, as it were. And I think that's such a powerful way to look at the way that you do marketing from a B2B standpoint. I think it's directly applicable to how people should be doing marketing from a B2C standpoint. And I know it's something that has been super helpful to our listeners of this episode. So Jenni, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate your time and your experience and sharing all your wonderful learnings from your years.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, relationship is the way to go. If anything else that you get from this, know that is the single most important thing that you should be leaning into.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenni.
Thank you, Shamir.